Good evening and thanks for joining us. The top stories today. The latest virus aid relief bill doesn't even make it out of the Senate. Republicans and Democrats are blaming each other. We hear from a business owner in Wisconsin who lost half her business to China. She tells us what she thinks will help small business in America. And U.S. officials seize thousands of fake Apple products from China, including earphones and charging cables. The Senate's latest attempt to advance a CCP virus aid bill came up short in voting. The 52-47 result is short of the needed 60 votes.
Democrat and Republican Party leaders were not happy with each other about yet another delay to the latest funding bill.
Senators who share the Democratic leader's toxic attitude, who think the real enemy are their political opponents, I assume will follow his lead and vote no. They can tell American families they care more about politics than helping them.
Schumer says it's Republicans' fault a bill hasn't passed yet.
This bill is not going to happen because it is so emaciated, so filled with poison pills, so partisanly designed. It was designed to fail.
The latest $500 billion bill includes money for school reopenings, jobless benefits, and virus vaccines. Lawmakers will next vote to avoid a government shutdown. It could mean CCP virus aid funding will need to wait until a post-election lame duck session.
Well, was it a good deal or not? I asked Vance Ginn that question. He's chief economist at the nonpartisan Texas Public Policy Foundation. Here's what he had to say.
Well, you know, the skinny bill wasn't passed in the Senate, but I do think that it was a good bill in the sense that it didn't pass trillions more on to a bloated national debt, which is what the House Democrats did with their recent bill that would have added $3.5 trillion more to national debt from mostly what I would think are wasteful programs, right? And what we really need to see, this is the part that I don't think was part of the skinny bill, though, was getting businesses operating and workers working again. That's what we really need to get American families back up and going and be more prosperous like we had just a few short months ago. And that's something that we've really been working on here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation of what's called the Workplace Recovery Act, which would essentially fund businesses who have had their livelihood stripped from them from state and local governments so that they can be operating again and workers can work again and be hired and be able to make an income. And I think that would be a great path forward for the American economy and mostly and ultimately, right, for families all across this country. And so whenever I'm thinking about what Congress should be doing, it should be about not increase in national debt substantially and think about focusing on getting the economy back going again. And by doing something along those lines, we can be able to really get things happening. And two, look, the big thing that we need is for state and local governments to safely reopen the economy. And if we do that, that allows for more operations to take place by businesses and workers to be able to work and be more prosperous overall.
No better stimulus. And like we've been reporting, the previous care packages were riddled with fraud. Now the DOJ is charging 50 more people for using paycheck protection loans to buy luxury items. It said the defendants used the money to travel, buy cars, jewelry, even adult entertainment. Here's what the DOJ had to say.
They were intended to help ordinary, everyday Americans pay their bills and put food on the table. I can assure you that they were not intended to help support fraudsters' dreams of owning Lamborghinis, Rolls-Royces, Range Rovers, or diamonds.
The new arrests mean the DOJ has now prosecuted 57 people since the PPP program began. They've recovered or frozen more than $30 million. And it's not just individuals. JP Morgan is firing several employees who allegedly pocketed relief funds. We asked fraud expert Frank McKenna if the same thing could be happening at other companies. He's chief fraud strategist at Point Predictive.
Yeah, it certainly could be happening at other companies and potentially even at other banks. What we've seen, there was a case of a paycheck protection program loan that a Walmart executive was applying for while he was working at Walmart. So that was an employee that applied for about $8 million in PPP loans while he was fully employed at Walmart. So he set up fictitious businesses, went to the SBA and tried to get loans and fabricated information and documents about those employers that weren't real. The government is just getting the very top of the iceberg of what the fraud is yet to become. There'll be thousands more cases over the next year, 2 and 3 years that we'll start to see emerge. So my estimate would be this type of fraud will cost taxpayers this year about $18 billion. So this type of fraud is a big impact to U.S. taxpayers. It's happening so often, you'd be surprised. In fact, all of the loans that are fraud that they found so far are very high-profile people.
And as we debate the new relief package, the jobs recovery may be slowing. New jobless claims stayed unchanged last week, missing analysts' expectations. Continuing claims actually rose.
The Labor Department says the number of Americans filing for unemployment for the first time was 884,000 last week. It's the same level as a week before, but higher than what economists forecasted.
All these numbers remain extremely elevated, and they came in above expectations. So this indicates that it's slow going forward for the U.S. economy.
The number of continuing claims and the total number of people claiming unemployment in all programs also rose. There are some bright spots, though. Amazon says it's hiring 33,000 new workers. UPS is also planning to hire 100,000 workers for the holiday shopping season. On the other hand, airlines are warning of layoffs without more support from the federal government. And Hamrick says there are many small businesses that are simply closing shop.
And there's a risk that not only will we have some permanent job losses, but the job losses that were previously thought to have been temporary may well turn out to be permanent as well.
Adding to the uncertainty is Congress's failure to agree on a stimulus package. Hamrick says economic recovery will partly depend on the availability of safe and effective vaccines.
And the stock market didn't have a great day either. All 3 major indexes down again. Things looked positive in the morning, but it was a volatile day and all ended in the red. All the big tech stocks took a hit, as did oil. The Dow fell nearly 406 points, or 1.45%. S&P 500 lost nearly 60 points, or 1.76%, and the Nasdaq dropped almost 222 points, or 1.99%. And there are a record number of empty apartments in New York City, and the number is rising. The author of a new report says it'll be months before things get better. NTD's Phil Zoe reports.
A new report by Douglas Elliman Real Estate and appraiser Miller Samuel shows there is a record supply of empty apartments for rent in New York City right now.
This has been it's been a record month of records.
There were 15,000 empty apartments in Manhattan alone in August, the most in 14 years. That's nearly triple the amount from the same time last year. Miller Samuel CEO told us the vacancy rate is also the highest it's ever been, more than double the normal range.
Not only is it a record, but it's the first time exceeding 5%. Last month was the first time exceeding 4%. The month before was the first time exceeding 3%.
Miller says renters are flocking to the suburbs to rent single-family houses. Those who can afford to purchase are also buying.
A surge in contract activity in the suburban markets that surround New York, and many of these are first-time buyers that are coming from Manhattan.
Miller expects the weakening rental market to last well into the fall season. Phil Zoe, NTD News, New York.
U.S. Customs officials seized more than 16,000 fake Apple products in a recent shipment from China. 14% of the items were counterfeit wireless headphones. The rest were fake charging cables. If authentic, the items would be valued at over $650,000. Customs and Border Protection discovered the counterfeit items in July while checking arriving shipments in Los Angeles. Of all the seizures last year, nearly half originated from China. CBP warns that buying fake electrical goods is dangerous because they don't go through rigorous safety testing. And incidents like these are making more and more people reconsider America's business relationship with China. The president is even talking about a full decoupling. And while these threats are new, many Americans felt the pain of outsourcing to China a long time ago. Debbie Flood is one of them. She's the president of the Wisconsin-based architectural hardware manufacturer Melron Corp. Melron lost half its business to China and was forced to innovate to survive. Many others weren't so lucky. I asked her how she felt as she watched so many jobs and so many businesses get lost to China in the 2000s.
Well, it was a shock because it happened extremely fast for us. Within about a year and a half, we lost almost 50% of our business. And so it was a moment of panic, really. We began to import some things of our own from China and really wondered how were we going to, as a small business, survive this. So it affected other businesses around us. I know businesses that the business went so fast that they were not able to survive. Fortunately, we were creative and pretty tenacious and believed that we could keep going. And like I said in my speech, we bought a 3D printer, which really changed the landscape for us and allowed us to compete with China in a way that we otherwise couldn't have.
And tell me a little bit about that, your innovation. How did it work?
Oh, it worked phenomenally. I happened to hear about 3D printing technology. This was in 2007, so it was really pretty early in the 3D printing world. But I asked if we could do our own patterns in our sand foundry with a 3D printer. So we took a risk. We bought the 3D printer, and it allowed us to take a customer's idea and go from their idea to a 3D printed sample. We could make a 3D printed pattern. We could have a cast sample and be in production in 3 to 4 weeks, which is something that China simply couldn't do. So we've often said we're not sure we would have made it through the recession had we not purchased that 3D printer. So we took a risk, and it really transformed our business.
And what kind of pro-growth policies or pro-business policies would you like to see, particularly over the next 4 years or 8 years, depending on who becomes the president?
I mean, I think what the Trump administration has fundamentally done over the last number of years for us, and in our state as well, with having Scott Walker as governor for quite a number of years, is really, from my perspective, it's using taxes, reducing regulations to create a stable and predictable business environment, and policies, similar policies, actually holding China to account. I mean, we've given China such a tremendous advantage over us. Again, give me a level playing field and I will compete with China all day long. So policies that actually level the playing field and make China comply with the same rules that the rest of us here have to comply with. Keeping taxes reasonable. Taxes don't have to go away. We're all okay with paying taxes, but keeping taxation reasonable and regulations. I mean, the reduction, we are the foundry industry is highly regulated, and keeping regulations in check is also something that is really necessary for us to be able to compete and to solve the problems of the future. I think if we invest in business, we can solve the problems that everyone, regardless of your political leanings, wants to solve: poverty, climate change, alternative energy, education, all of those things. If we depend on the innovation and creativity of small businesses and entrepreneurs, we can solve those problems.
Debbie, I'm glad you guys were able to innovate and you were able to join us today. So I really appreciate your time, and thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Senator Marco Rubio wants a review of a Chinese company's plan to acquire American supplements manufacturer GNC. Rubio told Fox Business that Chinese state-owned firms are trying to buy distressed American companies.
Now, people say, well, who cares about a vitamin company, GNC? It's not their intellectual property in that case. It's about data. GNC holds data on millions of Americans that have been their customers. If anyone's ever
Rubio sent a letter to Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin today asking for a national security review of the purchase. GNC says it's agreed to sell itself to one of China's largest drug makers, Harbin Pharmaceutical, for $760 million. And still to come this evening, the UK's Prime Minister pressures the EU by proposing new laws to revisit an old peace agreement between Northern Ireland and the South. The new laws would allow the UK to take advantage of Northern Ireland's unique status. And 1 in 5 companies in the UK are now considered zombie companies. We asked Daniel Akai at the Treasury's hedge fund if it's wise to let them restructure their debt. More on that after the break. The UK government wants to rewrite parts of the Brexit agreement. It's planning to reverse course on its Northern Ireland border deal.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson has presented laws that will in effect protect the UK if an EU trade agreement is not negotiated by mid-October. International law expert Lisa Lovedahl-Gormson says it's a political strategy to break the deadlock between the UK and the EU.
So in order to get things moving, he is, in a way, throwing his toys out of the pram by saying, well, if we don't get a trade agreement, you know what we're going to do? We are going to have this new law as a backup if we don't get a trade agreement.
The new laws will allow the UK to take advantage of Northern Ireland's unique EU status. She pointed out that Johnson is doing this more for political reasons than economic ones. He's not trying to get goods into the EU via Northern Ireland's soft border.
So we have a new law where we're creating an internal market, our own little internal market between Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England, which are part of the United Kingdom. And what he's trying to do is saying that it has always been the case that there should be no hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland.
She said, though, that if a trade deal can't be reached, then the only option is to make the best use of Northern Ireland's special arrangement with the EU.
That Northern Ireland have a specific position because they are not part of the EU, but yet they will be allowed to export and import without tariffs. So they will still somehow be part of the internal market.
But she says the Prime Minister's plan could backfire with an important ally to the UK.
I think he is playing a very, very dangerous game because if we leave without a trade deal, do we really think that we can get a trade agreement with the United States?
The EU and the UK have until October 15th to agree on a trade deal. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
And an influential British think tank says the UK should relax rules on repayment of coronavirus debts. This new study says almost 2 million jobs are at risk at companies facing insolvency without debt forgiveness. And while debt forgiveness sounds like a good thing, there are downsides. Ask Daniel Akai about them. He's chief economist at the Treasury's hedge fund.
The big problem is that on one side, the government is trying to keep as many companies alive in this downturn as possible, and that it tries to find ways to allow those companies that currently cannot service their debt at using operating income, despite extremely low rates and massive liquidity injections and banks willing to lend. But what is very difficult is that on one side, you may help zombify these companies for a while and they may survive, but the solvency problem is not addressed, and so you may keep some jobs for a certain period of time, but you don't create new ones because maybe these companies are allowed to survive, maybe some jobs are kept alive. However, they're not going to invest more, they're not going to increase expenditure and definitely not hire new employees. So it's a very delicate balance between the support of the productive capacity and the support of the business fabric and the risk of Japanese-style zombification, where you basically just have an enormous percentage of companies that are simply kept alive artificially, despite the fact that their solvency ratios and their liquidity situation doesn't improve.
Daniel, appreciate your insights as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
And still to come. If you're struggling financially, you might be tempted to draw from your retirement fund. We talked to Chris Burns at Dynamic Money to find out what you should consider before making the decision. More on that after the break. If you're hurting financially during the pandemic, you might be considering tapping your retirement fund. Earlier this year, the government eased restrictions so that you won't be penalised for withdrawals. But of course, you might regret it in the future. I talked to Chris Burns about it earlier. He's founder of financial planning company Dynamic Money. I asked him, is it worth people considering this option?
Consider, yes, but consider very seriously before you actually make any decision. So I was on the phone this morning with a client who needs to do this because she's not able to pay her bills right now. And so the ability to be able to go and get money out and have really good tax consequences compared to normally what would happen is a huge win for her. But a lot of people that are doing this are choosing it because they're saying it's an opportunity to get to my funds easily right now. And maybe they don't really need the funds desperately, but they like the idea of being able to take them. And that's where you really get into dangerous territory, because we just don't realize the impact of compound interest over time and what our dollar amount saved right now is actually going to look like once we get to retirement. And that's going to be critical to being able to retire. So Warren Buffett's famous for when he was young, his friends would hear him muttering, "Do I really want a $300,000 haircut?" And everybody's like, "What are you talking about?" Because he understood compound interest from a young age so well that he knew, this haircut's only a few dollars, but in 70 years, that would have been $300,000, that kind of an idea. And obviously, he figured that out pretty well, right? Well, most of us struggle with that. We see our 401k or our IRA balance, and we think of it as a lump sum that we have sitting there right now that we could take from. We don't see it as what it could be in 20 or 30 years, and that will probably be what funds us in retirement because we don't have pensions like we used to. So it's a very big deal to take from that right now.
Big choice for anyone. And we see a lot of people who are stuck at home at the minute. They've resorted to or they've started to trade online using apps like Robinhood and these types of things. What are your thoughts on that?
It's kind of the Dave Portnoy revolution, right? If you've seen that, there's a whole group of young people, and especially folks that may have been doing things like sports betting, for instance, or people that would be just into sports or into things they can't normally do, where it's a hobby for them. There's whole online groups set up now where it's basically it's like watching fantasy football or something in their minds, right? The danger, again, I always tell clients, if you're interested in doing that kind of investing, you need to treat that like you would treat going to Vegas. You have a set amount of money and you don't go back to the hotel room to get more from the safe, right? This is something you're doing as a hobby and you can afford to lose it. Actual investing for retirement should be massive diversification. It should be in a plan like a 401k where you're getting tax benefits and you really don't want to touch it. It's not something you play around with, because losing a significant amount, and I've talked with a lot of people already who said, I can do this on my own better than my 401k was doing it, and now they've lost a significant amount of money and they're not going to be able to get that back easily. And they're realizing that now, but there's no way to fix that. There's an opportunity cost that's pretty significant.
Yeah, and some really tragic stories as well of people who've lost during the pandemic. It's terrible. Chris, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And that's the latest business updates for now. Thank you for tuning in. See you tomorrow.